Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast. Walk, Run, Fly. Key characteristics of attaining an advanced SOC best practice tips on how to enter the advanced SOC dimension. Sponsored by Demisto. My name is Carol Auth of the SANS Institute, and I'll be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Rishi Bhargava, co-founder and VP of Marketing for Demisto, and Chris Crowley, SANS instructor and course author. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Carol. I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone taking the time to listen in today. And thank you, Rishi, for making the time to present with me. So basically today I want to talk a little bit about being in a position to advance your SOC. This is based on my experience with various customers and teaching for SANS. Rishi is going to be talking after me. I've got some introductory stuff, and then he's going to talk about how he will show you that Demisto can work in order to enhance your capability. So I have an assumption that I'm making, and the assumption is that your organization wants to get better. So if you're striving to get better and your organization isn't doing this, then or isn't supporting this, then you're going to have a real difficult time. So I want you to think about what your organization does to help you to retain excellent staff. I want you to think about how your organization is helping the SOC to retain knowledge. And I'll talk a little bit about a self-training program and how you can do this. Another part of this is that often people have this kind of culture of too busy, and they think that they can't exercise. Building exercises and doing them is really important. And if your organization doesn't support that, you're going to need to do some fundamental work in order to get in a position to do that. And then also, of course, seeking for technology that will help you to do the things that you want to do. Now, where I'm coming from in talking about a security operations center takes a little bit of explanation. So I'm gonna briefly mention the different sort of fundamental definitions that I have, and then some of the functional components that I think will be necessary to run a SOC. So the first thing is the notion of security operations. The security operations is what the SOC does. The intention of your security operations is to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your information systems. And information systems is a far-reaching definition. It includes the computers, the data, the people that are running these things. And we do this through proactive design and configuration, monitoring, to be able to differentiate authorized and desired actions from unauthorized and undesired actions. And then if something starts to go wrong, being able to minimize damage from those things that have gone wrong. And so I see this as a long-term effort. There is a design and build phase that needs to be done. And then there's this operate and mature. And a lot of what we're talking about today is really in the operate and mature, but it depends on the capabilities that were built. And what gets built is usually per the design and specifications that are there. So if your design isn't good and your build out isn't good, then you have a lot of difficulty trying to mature. I see, and I'm putting things in buckets for easy explanation. Of course, this is more of a, kind of a graded scale, but this is pretty much what I see. And these are the containers that I put things in. The first one is this idea of a compliant SOC. The compliant SOC is funded just to satisfy some requirement, some obligation that the organization thinks that it has. And then they set out to buy the tools that are needed in order to do these things. And then the compliant SOC starts operating, people start running it, and there's very little effort made to change, to grow, to enhance, to develop. The next bucket that I see is this idea of the security SOC. And so instead of just saying, okay, this is the baseline, this is the minimum of what we need, and let's do that and not change, what I call the security SOC with minimal competence is essentially, they're more interested in, hey, let's do all the things that a SOC really should do, but they don't do it well, and and they aren't changing and improving and enhancing. And there are a lot of reasons why this might be the case, but I see a lot of SOCs that look like this. They want to do better. They're not mandated to essentially be stuck in the box that a compliance SOC is, but they can't move forward. And then the final thing is this security SOC with high competence. These are the people who set the bar high. These are the people who the organization is challenging them to do well. They spend time interacting with the organization, and they're striving to get better, and they're doing it. So what is this difference between, and I mean, the compliance, you're going to be stuck in that space, and you're not going to be driven to grow, but what is the difference between the sort of minimally competent and striving SOC? And what I see the difference is, on the one side of the equation is the organizational support with the funding and the vision to drive the SOC to do well, giving the SOC some agency to actually change the organization in the way that it does some of its practices, and then letting the SOC actually do the things that it needs to do, change projects as they're being developed. Okay. Now, the flip side of that is, of course, the SOC needs to really understand what it is that the organization needs in order to be successful. And this doesn't mean just saying no. This doesn't mean saying, okay, we need to disconnect these computers from the internet. What this means is the SOC understands how the organization takes risks to make money. And it facilitates that through its security controls. And it doesn't interfere with the aspects of what the business is trying to execute. And then the last thing is this idea of threat intelligence, both consumption, external sources, research, and so on, and then production and creation. And so as I'm thinking about what a SOC is, there needs to be technology to do these things. There are inputs and outputs from different actions. There are processes and there are people. And so when I discuss SOCs, these are the terms that I use in order to talk about this. So I'm not going to go into detail about that now, but I just want you to understand that when I use those terms, that's where I'm coming from. In terms of the SOC itself, I'm going to talk about functional components, and I'm neglecting aspects of the software and the hardware and the interactions between these functions and the people who would make these things happen and the processes and playbooks and all the stuff that drives this. I only have 30 minutes, so I just want you to understand that this is, again, what I think is necessary in order to make a SOC. And some people will look at this and say, okay, well, you know, this part of my SOC, this function that you're describing is another team, and the SOC transfers stuff to them. Fine, but you need this capability. And if you don't have the capability, then your SOC is going to be minimally performant. Okay? So the first thing is this notion of the command center, sort of a 911 call center, request for assistance, as well as the ability to express information back out to the constituents of the organization. The next one is network security monitoring, and this actually encompasses all forms of monitoring. Watching the systems that are working and saying, aha, there's a potential problem, we need to address that. The next component is the idea of threat intelligence, being able to understand how attackers are changing. And I'd separate this into production and consumption. Production is we do the research and we learn new things about the attackers. Consumption is we buy the threat intelligence feed. Both are valuable, both should be done. More mature SOCs tend to do a lot more of the production. Incident response is something that when the monitoring capability detects that there's a problem, there's some resource that's available, internal, external, doesn't really matter, ad hoc or standing, again, doesn't matter, but this incident response capability can intervene and can protect the organization from having damage. I see forensics as a needed support capability for the SOC. Again, you might not have this resource on staff, you may outsource it, but I see host, network, reverse engineering, and e-discovery as all specializations within the forensic capability. And then finally, the notion of self-assessment. I want configuration monitoring on an ongoing basis. I want vulnerability assessment on an ongoing basis. I want pen testing, and I want exercises. And I'm lumping all of these things under security operation. Because if I were to build this from nothing, I need all of this stuff. And again, if your organization has a different vulnerability assessment team and a different pen test team, that's fine. but you risk siloed responsibility where the pen testers say, yeah, well, those systems are, you know, all messed up, and those guys needs to fix it. And the detection network security monitoring should have seen it when we were attacking. And if you have that sort of silo, you don't achieve maximal competence and use of resources. You have limited resources when you're trying to run a SOC. So you want to think about anything that you do on the security front driving the capability. And pen testers is a good example, can help to enhance your detection by walking through what they did and then checking to make sure that the detection capability actually saw it. I see a couple of different sort of structures out there in terms of how people do things. Smaller teams tend to have what I call a pool of people. You got a few people, they're doing all of the functions that I just described. Another one that I've seen, which is something that, again, I actually absorbed from a site visit that I did, was that the SOC structured itself and its staff based on attacker phase mirroring. The idea being that they took the cyber threat kill chain and then set up teams in order to intervene with all of the different stages of the attacker behavior according to the kill chain. And then the thing that I talk about in Management 517 is functional groups. So the things that I just described, you would have people assigned to those different roles. Okay. And again, this is all sort of basis of what we do in order to get a SOC. So I think that a mature SOC needs to be able to operate 24/7. This might be on call. This might be, you know, follow the sun. It also has the ability to interact with different SOCs in order to have a federated transfer of data. So follow the sun is a big challenge. You have challenges of stability of where you're going to put the resources. You have challenges of having staff who actually are competent to do the things that you expect them to do. And you have the challenges of cultural differences in order to be able to tell one group in one place that this is how the business works and they need to follow these rules. And then that person needs to wrap their brain around the fact that that may not be conformant with what they think is the best approach. Okay? And so transitions and consistency are a huge challenge. And everybody that I've talked to around this has a big challenge in terms of transitions and consistency when they deploy a follow the sun model. So sometimes what I see is sort of this core business group that's tasked with managing separate business units. And the idea with this is that these different business units are going to have their own funding sources. They each have their own SOC. And then there's some sort of intention of gluing them together by this sort of central federated capability. Another thing that I see is the idea of hierarchical multi-SOC models where you have a central global, which then cascades direction down to different SOCs. And each of the SOCs at the subsequent lower tiers are actually fully functional SOCs. And there are requirements on each of these fully functional SOCs to report information up. And the global has the sort of overall protection of the organization in mind. And then the other thing that I see is that same strategy of global and then lower tiers, but instead of having all of the functions that I described, only the functions that are needed to be specialized to the given locations are actually delegated. And as an example, you might have network security monitoring that needs to be done in Europe because you can't move the data out of Europe, right? So you have a challenge with data portability. So what you end up doing is you have this global SOC doing threat intelligence and other things and feeding information down to your European SOC, but your European SOC is not actually sharing information out to other components specific to the network traffic that they're monitoring, okay? And then of course you have this massive complex notion of, okay, this is how this all works. And I have a simplified data flow diagram of what I see across these different functions and the different processes that are there. And again, this is stuff that I talk about in Management 517. But if you want this diagram, this bit.ly link, bit.ly/crow -soc, and actually there's a typo in there, it should be bit.ly/crow-SOC. You can go ahead and download that Visio diagram in a couple of different forms. So in terms of maturity, now that we've got sort of a level set in terms of what I think the SOC is, in terms of maturity, I think that a SOC is agile. okay, and is adaptable. And over time, the SOC is intending to change to keep abreast of the changes that are there. And in mature SOCs, the people who are staffing the SOC are empowered to make decisions in the face of novel circumstances. And a mature SOC will have staff who understand that, hey, I need to make a choice. And what are the things that I need to balance in making this choice, and how do I make that choice? Okay. So as an example, we oftentimes use playbooks instead of very restrictive standard operating procedures in order to tell people what needs to be done without saying, this is the button that you push, and then you push the next button, then you push the next button. You need people who are professionals to be able to watch the various actions that are occurring and make a decision in a complex circumstance with substantial unknowns. Okay. So we use playbooks in order to do this. Sometimes we have standard operating procedures, specific steps, and these are good in a couple of cases. One is when you have a very complex sequence of events that must be followed exactly and prescriptively in order to avoid errors. So this is good for lower skilled people who don't have the knowledge to be able to actually know all of the different factors and make a decision in a complex environment, because they just can't do it. They don't have the experience or the skills. And so the checklist, standard operating procedure kind of thing is actually really useful here. But higher skilled people are actually quite benefited by standard operating procedures in the right circumstances. And sometimes they protest about that. So you have to try to get them to, do it when they need to in the exact standard operating procedure, and allow them to make complex calls in certain circumstances. And from a SOC design, you should be able to differentiate those things and say that. And your SOC will remain immature unless you can demonstrate where those opportunities for choosing are actually in place. So another thing that I think that a mature SOC does is perform analysis. And this is a word that we hear a lot. We talk about SOC analysts all the time, but most organizations that I ask the question of don't respond in the affirmative to this question. The question is, do you have an analytical practice which is consistent among the staff in your SOC? And so if you don't have that, if you don't have a way where your analysts can express how they do investigations and come to a reasonable hypothesis in a circumstance where they don't have all the data, then what you have is a bunch of people doing their best without any real practice there of analysis. Okay? And they may have analyst in their title, but you don't have maturity. And so the things that we talk about in relation to this are analysis of competing hypotheses. That's what the ACH is. The attack framework, the cyber threat kill chain. These are all intended as frameworks to help the analyst to actually manage a dramatic amount of information in order to be able to come to good conclusions and express their hypotheses of the current understanding. You notice that I didn't say that they express exactly what happened. Okay. Mature SOCs build use cases, or like good artists, they steal existing ones and tailor them to their needs, right? And so the idea here is that the use case describes a business relevant scenario of compromise and then how they're going to address that. Okay, and so I have a previous talk where I talked about use cases, and I'm just mentioning this here because I think that it's a really important thing that most organizations don't do well. Okay? So these are my steps to build a use case. Identify the scenario of interest and the business relevance. And so you'll have a lot of SOC analysts who are going to talk about all these scenarios that just don't matter to the business. And so part of this is this interaction between the SOC and the business and getting the good understanding of what needs to happen. Then you take this scenario and write it out like a story, right? This is the story. This is how the attacker would get in. And then you break it down into little piece parts of what are all the sequences that would be necessary in order to have that attacker accomplish this story. And then let's go look to see, can I get artifacts that would potentially be available associated with the story? And what does that data look like? What can I do with that data to differentiate things that are authorized from things that are unauthorized? And then with that data that I'm looking for detection, how can I use other data to help to make good decisions? So it's not just throwing out false positives all the time, but good decisions. This is a real problem. This is when we know this is a problem. Oftentimes, the SOC analyst can't do this sort of analytical assessment without the context of business relevance, and there will oftentimes be multiple iterations of questions back to the business of how do we know this, right? And then the other important part of this is the idea of threat intelligence. What do we know about attackers and how they're working that we can use to fold into this use case development in order to enrich the data to get a better understanding of when this is really a problem, when it's normal. And then we take all of these detection capabilities, we build them into some sort of a system, and the system doesn't need to be a SIM, but often it is. And then we implement it. And this is where people who are doing this often stop, right? Okay, our use case is implemented, we're done. No, you're not done. No, you're not done. What you do next is you actually assess the performance of the use case, and if possible, you actually assess it from the sense of you go and run the test of how would I differentiate this, and let's take an attacker simulated pen tester exercise type strategy and see if it actually shows up into our SIM like we would expect it to, rather than waiting and saying, okay, I set a trap, let's see if this this trap ever works. What we're doing is saying, I set a trap, I'm going to test the trap to make sure it works like I think it should. And then I can monitor that afterwards. And then over time, I'm going to go ahead and do this revision, review, update, and expiration, because sometimes the use case that we built isn't actually going to be useful for the long term. But then you want to have some idea of how long this actually should last for, right? And so what I expect in my environment, that a DNS C2 command and control occurs every single month. So this is command and control over DNS text records. Is that reasonable? And in some places, you probably are seeing this on a daily or a weekly basis, depending upon the size and the scope of your environment. If you have a very restrictive internal network, you're not going to see this in a month. You're not going to see it in a quarter. You might not even see it in a year, right? If you have a lot of control over the network already, you're not going to see this, but once a year, and maybe even then. And so think about all the things that change in your network that might actually make it so that you don't see this when it actually goes bad. Okay? And so I'd have this sort of annual review for something like DNS command and control if I had a very restrictive network. And then I'd say, this thing never fires. The likelihood of it being used by a threat actor is low. Let's get rid of it. Right? Or maybe I'd say, look, it never fires. It's not causing a lot of overhead. The work for the SIM to do the task of correlation isn't very much. Let's keep it, leave it there. On the off chance that it ever does fire, it's probably going to be a good detect. Another thing that mature SOCs do is they threat hunt. And the idea of this is that your SIM, your tool, your analytical capability is applied to the data that you have, presuming that all of your detection failed. Your environment's compromised, you just don't see it. And so now you're taking the data, you're performing analysis on that data, and then you're saying, okay, what are we missing? This is very different than immature SOCs. An immature SOC says, I'm waiting for the alert to fire, and then I'm marking it as a false positive and I'm done. A mature SOC says, I know that this tool will fail at some point, and so I'm going to go looking to see how it failed proactively. And then you take this threat hunt and turn it into a operational detection so that it is more automated. Mature SOCs develop a program for training themselves. And usually our external training resources are limited, right? Taking a bunch of people and sending them out to conferences and to Black Hat and to SANS stuff and to RSA, we can't do that. And plus it costs a lot of money to do that. So my suggestion is you have your team have time allocated to build and perform their own exercises inside of the SOC. And again, a lot of people are going to resist this because they're going to say, look, I'm already too busy. I'm already too busy and I don't have time to do this. But the way that you get better for the long term is you take the time, you allocate the time, you schedule the time. It's a requirement that you schedule the time as a SOC analyst to actually get better. And then you produce things that will make other people better and make you better in the process of producing them. So I think that a lot of people say, okay, well, that all sounds great. How do I measure this or assess this? There is a spreadsheet that Rob Venos has made available that I'd suggest that you download, tailor it to your organization, but this is a really good start. This SOC-CMM.com, SOC-CMM.com is the Security Operations Center Capability Maturity Matrix. There's a simple audit and an advanced audit. Take a look, decide your appropriate level of sophistication, and then go into it. And this resource is phenomenal, released, available for people to download and use. Rob Venos has done a great service to everybody by making this available. This is a good place for you to start. And again, I suggest that you potentially tailor it, but just taking a look at the list of the things that he says that you need to do, and then having a measurement of, yeah, we have this, no, we don't have that, and being able to say, okay, we're a 0.6 on a scale of 1 to 5, right? That's a really useful thing. So I know that I raced through a lot of things there fairly quickly, but I'm just trying to share my basic thoughts on the subject. In conclusion, I have this sort of 3-bucket strategy that I look at in terms of what maturity looks like. We have the idea of what a compliance SOC is. Okay, this is all we need. This is the baseline. We have to meet that bar, and we're going to get right to that bar and not really go beyond it. We have the people who are trying to do the things that I just described, but they can't make it work, right? And there are all sorts of barriers to being able to do this, but if you find that the organization wants the capability of a SOC, but you never really get moving forward, you're probably not doing some of the things that I just described, and that would be what would propel you to the next step. And then the last thing is, congratulations if you're in the the striving to get better, you have the high competence, you have the high capability, you're always looking for ways to improve, you're always exercising, you're pulling in threat intelligence, you're developing scenarios of assessment based on that threat intelligence, and then doing this on an ongoing, quarterly basis for having tabletops or real live fire type scenarios. And you've built in technical training capability so that your internal SOC analysts are all working on a analytical practice that you can assess the practice by using your consistent, technical challenges. That is high competence and striving for, the best sort of SOC that there is. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn things over to Rishi, but I do want to just basically put it out there. If you have thoughts that you don't get an opportunity to share in the question period, I'd love to hear about them. If you can tell me what you're doing that works really well for you, I'd love to hear that. My Twitter handle is ccrowmontans. My email is at the beginning of the slide deck. It's chris@montans.com. I'd love to hear how people are doing things to actually get better. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Rishi.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. That was very, very useful and informational. I'm actually going to absolutely walk through these similar learnings and how we establish a mature SOC with the Demisto as kind of the enabler platform. But as you really emphasized in your presentation, it's all about how the processes are set up, how the teams are set up, how do you enable the teams to go through all the best practices that you shared. With that, I think a few things to reiterate and kind of align. As we talked to our customers and prospects, the key aspects that jump out consistently, which is inhibiting our prospects to get to a mature SOC model, is things like the amount of data being fed from different set of products and tools is immense. And at the same time, to get to this maturity level, the lack of right set of talent, right? They have absolutely amazing analysts on their team in some cases, and they are overburdened because they are still performing these regular mundane tasks and not being able to get to what we call critical decision making. And the third problem that I hear consistently is the entire process. You talked about standard operating procedures, and we really hear from our customers that the standard operating procedures are enabler for consistency rather than restrictions. So when you think of standard operating procedures and the IR processes or the SOC processes, it's very important to take it to your team as enablers for consistency rather than restrictions on the smart analysts on what they cannot do. And these are the kind of challenges we hear from our prospects and customers. And as they mature through the journey, I'm going to share some of the successes as well. So when we look at these set of problems and how Demisto can help, we help in 3 different ways. And these pretty much align with what Chris was sharing around the process, the structure, and being able to respond to things faster in a better, more structured way. And then also the last piece, collaboration and learning, which we're going to talk about. How do you train the system? How do you train the analysts? How do you learn? Let's dig a little deeper on the case management, right? I mean, it is almost every SOC that I have talked to in the past 2.5 years of Demisto's existence. It's very clear that all the customers do have some sort of a tracking system. Now, some track it within an Excel spreadsheet, says these are the incidents that came in, this is assigned to this person, this is severity high, low, and using different frameworks, various, NIST, or their inbuilt frameworks. The core piece there is being able to track metrics, being able to define escalation processes, being able to have your standing operating procedures, which could be measured and tracked. So it's not good enough to just have those in place. It's also important to measure them. Now, if you have those standing operating procedures in place, and again, they don't need to be super well-defined or super mature. The better they are, the good head start you have, but continue to advance them over time. The second aspect is a large part of those standard operating procedures could be automated, and could be automated in terms of actions that an analyst performs. So a good example that again was mentioned earlier was threat intelligence. If you already have a set of threat feeds that come into that you guys subscribe as an enterprise, either being consumed by a threat intelligence platform or just coming in, connecting to your SIM of choice, in either way, do you really need your analyst to go check against that threat intelligence feed every time an alert is triggered? Or could you automate that? If one of the steps in your standard operating procedures is go check with Active Directory, what group does this user belong to? Is that a step that an analyst needs to take manually, or could that be automated? And these are just a couple of examples. There is a lot of different things as you look in your standard operating procedures or look at how analysts are responding, could be automated. And the third pillar of the solution is collaboration and learning. And this becomes the core tenet if you look at the long-term maturity of the SOC. How do you make sure that as you take certain parts of your standard operating procedures that are defined, part of them are automated, the time that you will free up for your analysts because they are not performing the same mundane tasks, how do you train them? And how do you make the system learn from their knowledge? A lot of our prospects and customers call it the bus factor. How do you retain the knowledge that an analyst gains during an investigation back in the system? How do you have another analyst learn from that? And we're going to touch upon this in the demo as well, but pretty much think of this as continuous learning, right? I have this firm belief that you cannot keep up with the level of training and education that people in the SOC need by sending them to twice a year or thrice a year training class. Even internal education, you cannot just schedule these monthly, as they are called, TOI sessions of transfer of information sessions. The learning and education needs to be continuous. The collaboration is an integral piece of that continuous education. And we're going to cover that and see how we can help. So effectively, I think at the highest level, the metrics that you need to really worry about is the reduced mean time to respond and reducing your operational risk, right? If you look at from an executive level or a board level, why and how you could justify all of the pieces in your SOC, it's about reducing that mean time to respond after you have detected something, or reducing your operational risk by proactively threat hunting, as we talked earlier, by automating that threat hunting so that you're not even exposed to the risk that may be out there. So those are the core tenets in Demisto. Digging deeper, the product basically helps you in different ways. One is automation. So product has 160 plus security integrations across the set of tools: your endpoint, your SIM, your sandbox, your threat intelligence feeds, and your Active Directory infrastructure, other IT tools, AWS, VMware infrastructure for containment and taking actions, a full case management system, including compliance, including evidence. And there's another interesting point which I would love to touch upon, which was mentioned briefly, was forensics. As we talk to our customers, most of the customers either have a retainer with an external specialized agency for forensics. But one thing they all would like to do is, even if the team is not doing deep forensics, every bit of data that is collected during an incident and investigation needs to be tracked as an evidence, made sure it's tamper-proof. So the process of conducting an investigation needs to have evidence and evidence collection as an important step, however high level or trivial that evidence might be. Because if, God forbid, that internal incident does turn into a public breach, you need that entire trail. And that incident management piece in Demisto can help significantly there. Threat management, and we did touch about the threat intelligence. And one of the points that Chris touched upon was, just don't be a consumer of the threat intelligence. How could you be a producer? As you mature your SOC capabilities, can you start to produce that threat intelligence? And the key piece there is looking at every alert or incident. There is always artifacts and data that comes into that, which could be interesting threat intelligence. So are you able to, without manual effort, correlate all of the incidents, find the IP addresses, the hashes that might exist across them? And even if it is not deemed bad by an external threat feed source, based on your internal information that it exists in a number of alerts and incidents in your organization, could you make a determination that it is actually malicious? And if you do, could you in future make sure that other incidents that see this already mark that as bad? So there are these aspects of producing the threat intelligence once you are consuming these alerts, and that life cycle is important. And then the integration with the other threat intelligence platforms that Demisto provides enhances that together as well. And the last piece, which again is goes back to the learning, goes back to the real-time interactive investigation, collaboration. We enable what is the model is called chat ops, and the idea is for each incident, letting the analyst collaborate with each other, but also letting analysts collaborate with our bot and ask simple questions in a structured manner, like go to Active Directory and fetch this detail for me. Go to all the endpoints and search for this hash across the enterprise. These commands, these actions are helping analysts, and then at the same time, the knowledge is retained and learned. And as we learn, here are the byproduct or the artifacts of learning from the analyst. And this is the data being learned from the analyst. So suggesting the new analyst that just joined your organization or is starting to learn the ropes of incident response or ropes of SOC, suggesting them what is the next best course of action in this particular incident. What kind of actions have other analysts taken in past? Who is an expert in your organization for this type of incident, and suggesting that you go collaborate with them. What are related or duplicate incidents for this particular incident that you're looking at, so that you do not spend time going researching and looking at the entire incident all over again if somebody else has already solved. And these are just some examples of how all the data from SOC coming in and all the automation data that Demisto gets via the automation that have been run as playbooks combines to make the analyst smarter, make the system smarter with each investigation. There's this other big aspect, which again, not to beat the dead horse here, which is collaboration, learning, community. We offer a very, very large community to all of you, all the attendees here. It's an open community. It's not only about Demisto prospects. It's not only about Demisto customers. It is an open community for SOC analysts, for incident responders, dedicated to IR. There are extremely useful discussions on the community. In fact, this morning, one of the biggest discussion I was following and learning from our analyst team members there was, how do you contain an incident? What are the best practices of containment? Some people were saying, hey, they have these firewall rules that are already pre-configured and defined, and then just push that automation as soon as an incident hits. Some people were saying the containment should be done at an infrastructure level. So some very, very good discussions. We encourage you to go join the community. It is for everybody to share the knowledges and have great discussions. Some of the results from our deployment, and then we'll jump into a quick short demo. We have seen significant benefits in MTTR reduction from deployment of Demisto. The customers on an average see 30% reduction in mean time to respond across different types of incident. I think what is not important is that number. What is more important is a way to track that mean time to response reduction over time and making sure that you're making progress, right? Every year, can you reduce that effectively? Are you able to track the mean time to respond for this type of incident is higher than this other type of incident, and aspects of those? There's this other side, which we call the war room, right? I mean, think of the executive team and the SOC directors who are listening here. They're more worried about the metrics because that is their measure of success of the SOC. But then there is this analyst who is in a war, who has eyes on glass, looking at every alert coming in. They need to do their job. And in this case study that I'm showing here, we have been able to reduce the number of alerts that an analyst needs to really look at by 95%. So they only worry about alerts that actually are not auto-closed by Demisto. And from this aspect, if you look at your organization, there is a lot of the different types of alerts and incidents that could be literally auto-closed. Things like external penetration testing that is being conducted by somebody from either your team or sanctioned to an external contractor. Those pen testing will generate alerts across your organization. Can you auto-close those alerts out based on the criteria? Can there be an automation and a playbook for that? And these are some simple examples where automation can help tremendously. So continuing, let's take a look at a quick demo and some of the pieces of the product on how Demisto can help there. So here, what I'm showing is a dashboard of the data that is collected across all the incident management pieces, all the alerts coming in, all the automations that I've run. And a quick thing again about the metrics, some simple metrics that you see here are things like new incidents. How are the new incidents growing? Are the new incidents trending higher, lower from the last week that we are looking at? what are the active incidents by severity. Is the critical incidents, there's 1 critical incident in the last 7 days, 5 high, 2 medium, 5 of unknown severity. Are there any unassigned? Because if there are unassigned incidents, then that's critical. So a lot of these metrics and these dashboards are extremely customizable. In fact, another dashboard that I built was the threat intelligence metrics dashboard, which tells you the activity of bad indicators. And we can look at it over the last 30 days of how is the bad indicators in my environment doing, which of the different types are actually more prevalent as bad indicators, email from a phishing perspective. So a lot of different set of metrics in there. And these are all easily customizable and visible to the SOC managers, directors, analysts, and people can build their own dashboards to their need. The core piece of the Demisto's platform is being able to consume alerts from different sources, whether it's the SIM, whether it's an email box, like most of the organizations that we talk to have an abuse mailbox where employees can forward suspicious email, or it is a mailbox which gets forwarded the phishing emails that are deemed by another tool. So we can consume those alerts, bring that into a central place, and then for each of these alerts, which is given a type, run what we call an automation playbook. So a good example of a playbook that we're going to run today is a playbook to extract and just enrich indicators. I've taken an extremely simple example for the sake of demonstration here, but it's like take all the indicators that are found and then go ahead and find threat feed reputations from all the threat feeds that are coming in to your threat intelligence platform or directly connected to Demisto based on the use case. And then if there is any malicious indicators found, then go ahead, send an email to an analyst, and then wait for them to respond. And we're going to show you some workflows here where these playbooks and standard operating procedures, as some people call it, could have automated steps like this one, like this entire playbook which we are embedding. This is an entire playbook which is automated of collecting URLs and incident, or that could have manual steps. So this is a manual step, which is review the enrichment results, which could be completed by an analyst manually, or it could be completed as a response to an email and things like those. So this is a very, very simple playbook. Now, editing this playbook is extremely easy. So if you want to add certain tasks, let's say you want to add a task to go communicate with Active Directory and find users' detail. So you can look at all the commands in Active Directory here, and one of them is an AD get user, or you could quickly search right up here, say AD get user, and here is a command to AD get user, and you can provide details for all the parameters that might take, and then you can place this task wherever you would like. You can connect and run these tasks in either parallel, or you can insert it between sequentially. So almost these playbooks are as easy to build as a Visio diagram. So if you have a standard operating procedures drawn in Visio, build these standard operating procedures either with automations or with manual tasks. A lot of our customers are building this with manual tasks as well. So I'm going to close this out quickly and show you an incident that I triggered this morning already to run through this scenario and save certain time for questions as well. So this is an automation that we ran to extract and run indicators. So let's go ahead and quickly create a new incident of type malware and run this. So the type is malware, and what we have done is for any incident, and this is a manual step I'm doing, but this would be consumed from your source. The data that comes in automatically gets associated with the playbook that we were talking about. So let's actually pick up some malicious indicators, and I'm putting in some actual malicious indicators here and run that incident right here. So you're seeing this incident runs, and automatically a summary is generated for this incident. And as the playbook runs live, the indicators will be extracted. They will be enriched from all of the different sources as well. The other view, while the enrichment is being done, is a quick view of looking at related incidents. So very quickly, as I mentioned, the Demisto already correlated all your indicators. And here is a view of saying, what are other related incidents? So this incident 18977 is 70% similar. This another incident 18951 is 63% similar. And this is pretty close to time. I can take that incident and link that as one of the related incidents. So once you link that incident, then you are able to, oops, I repeated that linking. So once you're able to link that incident, you go ahead and look at all the linked data across all incidents right there. So let's quickly look at, in the meantime, all of the data that came in for that particular incident. And we can quickly see that these indicators were deemed bad. All the data was brought in. So from an analyst perspective, in a quick glance, they can see what's bad data and what's related incidents right there for them. So that's a quick overview. There are other aspects of collaboration. So in this incident, as I said, it's all about continuous learning. I can actually invite Slavik and say, can you take a look at this incident, right? And immediately Slavik gets added to the investigation. He will be invited. He will get a notification on all the different systems like an email or a Slack collaboration tool, and they can collaborate. Or I can actually say, dbot, help me. So I can actually tell dbot to get user details. So when I say bang, this is a way to tell dbot to run a command. And let's say I want to learn more about a particular user. And these automations are also built in 1,000+ different automation where you can collaborate with the bot to be able to get all of this data. So I think we're going to keep the demo to limited time so that we are able to take some questions as well. But quick things to highlight again. From a SOC maturity perspective, automation helps you save time on simple tasks like running different aspects of automations. The collaboration is able to let multiple analysts collaborate with each other, and also running some tasks with dbots so that you do not have to go open 20 different tabs and do that task. And then the entire data across all these incidents are collected in related incidents, that's collected in dashboard or scheduled reports that could be sent out from a metrics perspective. And effectively delivering a mature SOC from a proactive threat hunting perspective, from following the standard operating procedures for consistency, and or just making the analyst more efficient with all the automations. So with that, I think I'm going to switch back to the slide deck for one recap slide and then move to questions right here. So we think of Demisto as the platform helping all tiers of SOC teams. We have seen some significant ROI, and we would like to invite the team to our community on Slack, very easily subscribable from our webpage. So let's open the floor for some questions, Carol.
All right, well, thanks for that great presentation. We do have some questions ready for the Q&A. However, if anyone has a question for our presenters, please enter it into the questions window now. Our first question is, how can Demisto help a SOC become a highly competent SOC?
Yeah, we did cover some of this. I think the only thing I would want to recap is think of your SOC as something to measure on a continuous basis. Chris touched upon metrics-wise. We see automation and collaboration as the two core components. Think of your team as continuous training, collaboration helping there, and then take the mundane work off the analyst plates so that they can focus on more decision-making and better learning. And that's where Demisto helps significantly. And Chris, feel free to add any comments throughout these questions as you see fit.
All right, thanks. How can Demisto help with federation of SOC?
Yeah, that's actually a good one. I think this federation model that Chris touched upon was a very, very important one. What we are starting to see is like it's hard to build a SOC with a dedicated place, or there are always part-time resources that a SOC has to loan or borrow from other teams. Where Demisto helps is, as we saw in that war room where we're collaborating and chatting, the entire trail of the incident is kept in one place. So if you have people coming in, working on an incident, moving on to the shift, or there are people who you need to quickly ask a question or sign off a task, all those aspects of the entire process is handled. And I think the automation helps in federation to some extent as well, because if a lot of these tasks that are typically handed out to different teams, that could be pulled back into automation to drive efficiency and federation.
Yeah, and this is Chris, just, and not speaking to Demisto specifically, but one of the challenges that people run into when they're working across a distributed organization. So if you have a federation, then essentially what it is I have my space, you have your space. There are these different things we approach the problem differently. But whatever the federation is, there's some coordinated effort that needs to happen. And organizationally, it becomes complex of what I cannot share. And so then, oftentimes we have these boundaries that are established, you have interfaces. And so, any tool that says, okay, here's what I can share to these other components of my organization, and having that available to people, sort of through an agreed upon transfer mechanism. And again, the technology can solve it. The way that people usually solve it is they say, I know who to pick up the phone and call because I've worked with that person in the past. But then institutionalizing that relationship is really what becomes important in order to be able to be effective at managing a very large environment. And then in a follow the sun model, which again is sort of a different thing structurally, being able to say, okay, well, I need to leave this alone and hand it off to the next group, and having a consistent tool to do that is a really useful thing. Because again, the way that most people solve it now is we have a 30-minute meeting where we're dovetailing the shifts of two different groups of people, and then they're talking about what they did and what they didn't do and what needs to be done and what direction to go next. And that, frankly, doesn't work really well in practice. I mean, everybody that I've talked to that manages a global 24/7 rolling follow the sun type SOC is always frustrated by handoffs. That is one of their largest problems. So having something that helps to resolve that will actually be beneficial long term for the organization.
All right, thank you both. Rishi, you mentioned that 95% alerts can be reduced from 10,000 down to 500 for humans to review. How does Demisto decide which alert isn't worth human time?
That actually is a fantastic question. I think the answer is it is a two-step process. So one is, as we go into an organization, analysts and customers define certain playbooks, and that step is basically the customer identifies that this is my standard operating procedures for an analyst to perform typically, and if it is deterministically bad, then don't look at it. A good example is if you have an alert coming in from a network tool and which says, hey, detected this particular file being downloaded to an end user desktop, and that alert is fed into Demisto, and there is a playbook which says, go ahead from the packet capture, extract a file using the API of your network tool of choice. Take that file hash and check with the threat feed if it is bad. And if it is indeed bad, close the alert and create a block rule for the source IP address of that network initial traffic. That is a very deterministic scenario. Pretty much analysts can deterministically say that if this happens, and that could be designed as a playbook as we saw in Demisto, and that's what eventually becomes something that a human will not see. And these are examples, and there are a lot of such examples, phishing email examples, and many others.
All right, maybe we can squeeze this last question in. Can custom in-house products be integrated in automated actions or playbooks in Demisto? How would such integration take place? API?
Yes, good question, and the answer is yes and yes. There is ways to build custom integrations in Demisto with a full SDK, built-in editor, extremely easy, using the API available in that partner product or the internal product. Extremely straightforward. We have had partners, customers, community building integrations and contributing.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rishi and Chris, for your great presentation, and to Demisto for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.